1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 4. Samuel did what the Lord said, and when he arrived at Bethlehem, the elders of the town trembled when they met him, because when the prophets show up, people got scared, like, what are the prophets going to say? All right? So they got scared when they met Samuel, and they asked, "Do you come in peace?" And Samuel replied, "Yes, in peace. I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Consecrate yourselves," in other words, get your guys ready, "and come to the sacrifice with me." And then he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. When they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab, which was one of Jesse's sons, and he thought, "Surely the Lord's anointed stands here before the Lord." Like, Samuel thought that Eliab, one of Jesse's sons, was the one that was going to be chosen king. He said, "This has to be the one." Verse 7, "But the Lord said to Samuel, 'Do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him.' The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." Somebody needed to hear that, okay? Then Jesse called Abinadab, we call it Abby for the day, right? Then Jesse called Abby and had him pass in front of Samuel. But Samuel said, "The Lord has not chosen this one either." Jesse then had Shammah pass by, but Samuel said, "Nor has the Lord chosen this one." Jesse had all 7 of his sons pass before Samuel, but Samuel said to them, "The Lord has not chosen these." So Samuel, he asked Jesse, he says, something got to be wrong, because Samuel's thinking like, yeah, I know I heard God correctly to come to Jesse's house. Something's wrong with this. So Samuel turns to Jesse and he asks him, he says, "Are these all your sons you have?" Jesse answered, "Oh, they're still the youngest. He's out tending the sheep." Settle in on that phrase for a second. He's tending the sheep. For purposes of our discussion today, tending the sheep is taking care of the priorities. It's taking care of the little things. I'm going to fast forward and I'm going to come back to this, because if you know the story of David, what happened to David, what's he well known for? He's well known for standing on the battleground in front of the Philistines and taking down the giant Goliath. That's what everybody, I don't care if you've been to church as a little kid, you understand the story of David and Goliath. Even if you've never been to church, you've understood. If you heard the phrase David and Goliath, that's what he's known for. So fast forward the next chapter in 1 Samuel 17, verses 32 to 37, we have David. He gets to the battlefield. Again, we fast forward a little bit here. David gets to the battlefield, and he sees that the armies of the Philistines are shouting at the armies of Israel. Particularly Goliath is shouting at the armies of Israel, threatening them and saying, "Hey, come fight me, and if I win, you guys are my slaves, and if we win, we'll be your slaves," vice versa. A bunch of talk, right? But David shows up at the battlefield, and he goes to Saul, who was the first king of Israel. He goes to Saul, and he says to Saul, because David heard what Goliath was saying. He says to Saul, he says, "Let no one lose heart." Like, don't be afraid, don't be scared, let nobody be shaken up on account of this Philistine, Goliath. He says, "Your servant, him, David, will go out and fight him." Saul, the king at the time, replied, "You are not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You're only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul, he said, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep." Pause for a second. What was David doing when Samuel came to choose the new king? What was he doing? He was tending the sheep. And when Saul says, "You can't fight because you're a young man," what is his response? "I've been tending the sheep. I've been handling my priorities." Why does that make sense? Well, look what he responds. He says, "Because when a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it. I struck it and rescued the sheep from its mouth. And when it turned on me, like when it tried to get me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. See, your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. And this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God." Pay attention, verse 37. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear while I was tending sheep will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. We got to understand something here. All right, we got to understand that David was the forgotten son. All right, we hear about the prodigal son, but David was the forgotten son. David was not invited to his own promotion. Like, he was not invited to his own award ceremony. Because nobody knew that David was going to be awarded. Nobody knew that David was going to be promoted. And this David that was not promoted to his own not invited to his own promotion, ended up being the goat king of Israel. By goat king, not the animal, right? The greatest of all time. You understand what I'm saying? He was the goat of the kings of Israel. He was known for his military leadership. He was an incredible worship leader. Many of the book of Psalms, which were psalms, songs intended to be sung in worship and reverence to God. He was the inspired writer of those, inspired by the Holy Spirit to put those down that we now have today. He was a great example of somebody who got knocked down and got back up, who fell into sin, repented, and came back, and God honored and said, this dude is a man after my own heart. Like, he was a great example of all this. He was an example of honor and kingdom principle. And he wasn't invited to his own promotion. He was the forgotten son. But I want to tell you that we see so much from David through the fact that he was doing what? Tending his sheep. He was handling his priorities. He was handling the little things first. Why do we say it was a little thing? Because think about it for a second. He was out taking care of the business. And I'm going to tell you why that's important in a second. But when Samuel showed up, he was completely forgotten. David was tending the sheep. He was doing the little things first. And I want to tell you that David recognized that the tending of the sheep at that time was what set him up for the battle later on that launched him. When he was tending the sheep, what does that look like? And this is for us to kind of put ourselves into the story here, because a lot of times we don't want to do the little things first because we think that the little things don't matter. Priorities is putting the little things in the proper order. There are things that have to get done first. If David did not find himself tending the sheep, he would not have found himself taking down Goliath. If he was not taking care of the little things when he had to do the little things first, he would not have been able to handle the big things when they presented themselves. Right? Why? Man. The small things are important. Think about this for a second. We read already that the preparation of the battle with Goliath was while he was tending the sheep. The preparation of the big battle was while he was handling the quote-unquote little things. It was there that while he was tending the sheep that he found himself in battles, and listen up, he found himself in battles that probably nobody even knew about. Because he says that when the lion and the bear, first of all, I didn't even know there was bears in Israel. Did anybody else know that there was bears in Israel? I didn't know there was bears like that. And I don't know, whatever. I'm going to still study that point. I didn't know. And when they showed up to take away the sheep, what did he do? He went after them. He doesn't say, yo, I got my homies, we went and we took care of business. No, he's like, I went after them because I knew that the Lord would have my back as I took care of what I had to take care of. But it was seemingly a little thing because the family is, oh yeah, he's tending the sheep. He's doing that. What impacts me is that what the family disregarded as important was the little thing that David had to do. And if you start thinking about what David was actually doing, it wasn't even that little as it related to importance of the family. But in the eyes of the family, it was a little thing. Why do I say that? Because if you think about that time in the agricultural times, the sheep represented, the sheep, the cattle, and all these things. What did they represent? They represented the wealth of the family. They represented the economic status of the family. David, the youngest, was out there handling the things that nobody else wanted to do. So much so that David's out there doing something. Doesn't matter. He's doing whatever. But he was handling the wealth of the family. Guys, what you don't understand, when you were taking care of what looks like a little thing, you were actually taking care of big things. You just don't know it because the little thing is still in seed form. Man, I'm trying to go too fast in my notes. He was taking care of the wealth of the family. What? The sheep, they represented the meat. They represented the wool, the skin. When it peeled off, they became parchment. All these things were things of economic commerce that could be exchanged for money to sustain the family. And we already know he had 7 other brothers, so we know it was a big family. You know what I'm saying? People had to eat, right? So it was not only the wealth of the family, it was the sustenance of the family. It was... Like I said, the time of the preparation for his battle while he was fighting battles that nobody even knew he was fighting. But he was also, think about this for a second, the sheep, what did they represent in the time of atonement for sins? The sheep represented the sacrifice. David was safeguarding the thing that the family one day would have to bring back to offer before the Lord. You see, we take for granted often the little things that God has given us, and not even little things, but we made them little things. We take for granted our spouses, we take for granted our children, we take for granted our jobs, our businesses, and the things that we have. We make them little when they were never intended to be little. They were intended to be big in the time of God. We didn't protect the seed now because we didn't have the proper priorities. You know why we don't take care of the priorities? The Prior-Itties? Because when it comes to the Prior-Itties, the little things that we're supposed to be doing, when it's the tending of the sheep, nobody else gave it importance. Because it looks like lonely work. It looks like long days with no cell phone games to play on. No one to text, no one to talk to, no one to conversate with in the middle of the desert. Constantly looking out for lions and bears and things like it's lonely days, long work days. With no good conversation. He was overlooked and underpaid. Like, we don't care if you don't come to your own promotion. Overlooked, unappreciated, overworked. I mean, look, Jesse had a lot of kids. I get it. I got 4 of them, and every now and then I mess up their names, but I don't forget them. You understand what I'm saying? I might mess up their names and call one the other name, but I still know I got 4. Jesse, oh yeah, there was one more, my bad. Like, talk about overlooked and unappreciated. Like, that one hurt. Right? He was the one that was taken for granted. And many of us, we don't take care of our Prior-Itties because we use the kiss of death phrase. What is the kiss of death phrase? Some of you guys have heard me say it from here. It's not fair. It's not fair that everybody gets to be in the house when Samuel's coming over to pick the sons of the house to be the king. It's not fair. Fairness doesn't have nothing to do with it. It's about handling your Prior-Itties, the little things that have to come first so that God can do what he has to do through you. But if you do not take care of the seed today, you will not have the tree tomorrow. It's as simple as that. The problem that we face and the danger that we face is in our lives, the little things, they become too familiar. They become too familiar. We get too used to the little things and we forget the impact that the little things will have in the future. That's why we take for granted our loved ones. That's why we take for granted our jobs. It becomes too familiar. I've showed up too many times late to work. Nobody said anything. I guess it doesn't matter if I show up late to work and then the day you get fired, you're like, why'd I get fired? Because you showed up late to work. Well, why'd you show up late to work? Because you got too familiar. You got too comfortable. Are you hearing what I'm saying? Right? You've been praying to get into the program and the school and the study program that you want to get to, and you're like, oh, everything is about that. I remember when I was studying for the bar, everything was, man, I was on point. Why? Because I did not want to fail that bar. And then I became a lawyer, and there's been days where I'm like, I don't even want to be a lawyer no more. Got too familiar with it. Are you hearing me? Because we forgot the prior-itties, the little things before that make all the difference now and into the future. What little things have you give up on in your life? What little things have you forgotten to give priority to? Because every little commitment now, as I have stated, is a seed that will produce fruit in due time. And everything that we do needs to be fully committed to Him. I'll say it again. Everything we do, or every little commitment now, is a seed that will produce fruit in due time. But what you do has to be fully committed to Him. Proverbs 16, verse 3. And help me low in the back there. Proverbs 16, verse 3 says this: commit to the Lord whatever you do, and He will establish your plans. What do we got to do? Commit to the Lord. Commit to the Lord. Commit to the Lord. The word commit here means to roll it all together. To put it all together. Whatever you do, make sure it is fully and completely rolled together with God. Completely intertwined. Like your marriage, God's got to be part of it. Your workplace, God's got to be part of it. Your child activities, God's got to be part of it. Your Mondays, God's got to be part of it. Tuesdays, Wednesdays, all the way back again through Sunday, God's got to be part of every day. He's got to be rolled up all in it. Whatever you do in those times, got to be fully committed to God. Whatever you do, fully connected. David understood that. David understood that because, look at this. He said, when the lion or the bear came, I rescued it. And he says, just like in that case, while I was tending the sheep, it was the Lord that rescued me. He understood that without Him, it wasn't his skill set, it wasn't his talents, it wasn't his strength, it wasn't his ability. It was the Lord. He involved the Lord in everything that he did. He did it when he was tending the sheep, and he did it when he was facing Goliath. He was committed.